Wow. That's amazing music. I encourage you guys sometime, if you don't ever do this, to go look up the lyrics, take the bulletins home, look up the lyrics. Sometimes we're going to try to have the lyrics actually in there, just kind of look along, see what you can just kind of really reflect on the lyrics. But the message is always there, and sometimes, I know Charles and I both felt like this, but I feel this way, especially sometimes when you, I don't really need to say anything. I just need to sit down. I mean, the lyrics, when we pick these songs out, along with the scripture text and stuff, it's all there. So maybe you get a chance to reflect on it some. So it's Pentecost. Are you ready? Okay. I got Spirit. Yes, I do. I got Spirit. How about you? That was pretty bad. That was pretty bad. Let's try one more time to see what happens, okay? Ready? I got Spirit. Yes, I do. I got Spirit. How about you? Oh, you're going like, really? Are we doing that for real? It's kind of silly, isn't it? Yeah, and then that's what happens, right? We've got more. We've got more. And back and forth, back and forth. I was thinking about that this week because I was thinking about camps, and I was thinking about the camps that I work with, and Brad works with, where are you? There you are, Brad. Brad works with, you like blended into the chair perfectly today. It's like almost a match. But so Brad works at these camps now, and I've kind of retired off of these working with these camps. But these are camps with kids with cancer. I mean, kids who have experienced cancer, who are in the midst of experience, or kids who are in the midst of chemotherapy, or who have recovered and have been cancer-free for a number of years. But these kids, they gather, and then there's several hundred of them in the dining hall, and then someone shouts it out. And next thing you know, there's just this huge hurricane of noise going back and forth until it just intensifies into a frenzy. And then, of course, by midweek, it'll go around from table to table, and then inevitably it dies somewhere in the middle because that table says, I've had enough Spirit. They just get to hump day, and they're exhausted, and nobody wants to participate anymore. But then it comes back again. They remember what it was all about, and that's only natural. Well, it's kind of silly. And I imagine sometimes if someone were sort of looking out, as they might do if they were walking through the courtyard, and that may be why we wait until 11 minutes after. But if they were walking through, they might see us dancing in a circle, and then next thing you know, they might hear us shouting back and forth, I've got Spirit, yes I do. And they might just think, well, those people are just silly. They're just not taking it serious. And I wonder sometimes if maybe we don't get silly enough. Maybe if we take things so serious that we forget just what it means to be spirited. So here's the text I want to read to you, because the other two texts were about the Spirit being given by God to the different people. The one from Moses, when Moses was at Mount Sinai in the book of Numbers, and God gave the Spirit to Moses as he came down with the 10 Commandments, and then gave it to the 70 people who were around him, sort of like the elders, and then they started gossiping around one another. Did you hear so-and-so was prophesying? I mean, has he been baptized? We can't do that. And then Moses says, would that everybody was with the Spirit, and that everybody prophesied. So then you get to the New Testament, and you have Jesus offering the Spirit to the disciples. This is the most familiar passage that we celebrate on the birthday of the church, Acts 2. And I'm just going to read it to you because I think it's an interesting passage, and it's got all the words that nobody else wanted to pronounce, so I'm going to pronounce them. Actually, I'm going to beat them up. That's right. All those years at seminary didn't help. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a loud sound like a rush of violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were residing. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and then a tongue resting upon each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them the ability. There were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at the sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native tongue of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, are not all of these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Liberia belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. Thank you very much. Yeah. Cretans and Arabs, in our own language, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power. They were all amazed. They were perplexed. They said one to another, what does this mean? Then some said, and they sneered and joked and said, well, they're just filled with new wine. They're drunk. But Peter said, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them, saying, Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk as you suppose, because it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. That just stopped me when I read that. Does that mean, like, give them 30 minutes? No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares that I will pour my spirit out upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. God, I like that idea. Even upon the slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they too shall prophesy. So how many of you have spoken in tongues? I almost thought I wouldn't ask this question in case 5 or 6 hands went up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do now. After new wine, yeah. Really. And or been slain in the Spirit. Been to a charismatic service. I know you have. Well, I have. I mean, I haven't spoken in tongues, but I've been to Pentecostal services. I used to belong to a Church of God here in Fort Worth. It was called Cornerstone Ministries back in the mid-'70s. I was there for a year. And, of course, things were happening all around. It was just a fury of emotion, and certainly you could feel a sense of spirit. But what was exactly happening? You know, I always remember the first time I went there, it was like, have you been baptized in the Spirit? As if it was something separate. Well, I'm Methodist. I was baptized in the Methodist church, and they were like, oh, no, that's not going to work. It's not going to happen. When we think about Spirit, we think about people who have Spirit. We say that person's got a lot of Spirit. When we think about a discussion, we might say that was a spirited discussion. We might even go so far as to say a person was Spirit-filled. But I want to suggest to you that, in fact, all of these texts, which appear hundreds of years apart from each other, are sharing one common denominator. And that common denominator is that the Spirit is already present. What exactly is the Spirit? Well, we'll get to that. But what I also want to suggest to you is that what is common in all of these stories and in all the people you can think of who have Spirit or spirited discussions is that they are animated. That is it. They are animated. Some years ago when I was working at one of the camps up in Michigan, I was at a place called Camp Quality, and it's up near Traverse City. You guys ever been up that way? Petoskey, Traverse City. I know there's some of our folks who've been up in that area. Traverse City, of course, is kind of on the west side of the state, and then Petoskey's up to the north. But Michigan is very rich and full of diversity of Native American tribes who have been there for centuries and who still have a great claim on that land. I was at a camp for kids with cancer called Camp Quality, and it was outside of Traverse City. They decided this theme was going to be Native American for that week, and so they invited the local tribes, the Chippewa and the Odawa, to come and build some lodges. Now, one would be a council lodge, and those are large. Those are very big, and they take large numbers of people, several dozen, and it takes several days. We're there for about 8 to 10 days. So they would start at the beginning and build throughout the week, and it would be something everyone would sort of participate in and see being built. A small sweat lodge was also built, and then there were some teepees that they had just set up pretty quickly just for gathering and talking and doing activities. But it was the lodge which was fascinating to watch because this thing was huge. It was not quite, about almost half the size, a little bigger than half the size of this room, but you could easily sit a couple of hundred people on the floor. And it was a great council room is what they called it. I remember the first day I was just kind of milling around, and I went over and I talked to one of the Chippewa elders. And I won't forget, I looked at him and I said, so how come y'all haven't started? Because it was almost 10 o'clock in the morning. And he looked over at me and kind of sneered, and he said, we're waiting for the Odawa. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they're on Odawa time. And I said, well, I'm sorry. And he said, oh, no, it's not a problem. Then another one chimed in right beside him, and he said, oh, the Odawa, they couldn't find their way out of a burlap sack. And then one joked and said, they probably went to Canada to find the poles that are already in their backyard. And they just went on with this kind of insulting. And I thought, like, shouldn't your focus be against the white man or something? I mean, isn't that, don't you have a common enemy? Enemy of my enemy is, my friend, whatever. And they just kind of insulted these folks. And then when they showed up, they were all working together, and they all were chiming in and having a great time. 2 days later, the Odawa were there early. And I asked, and I said, so the other was coming along? They were here the other day. No, he said, they're on Chippewa time. The exact same thing. Started putting down the Chippewa right and left. And about midway into the week, they were making this great progress. And I asked the guy, I just took him aside, and I said, come on now, really? I said, you guys were just insulting each other right and left. And then I find out that you're actually part of the same consolidated tribal system now. And he said, oh, yeah. We do. Bad spirit comes along. We get mad at each other. We pick on each other. It's there. But then we remember, and the good spirit takes over. And I thought, okay, I think I'm getting it now. So you've got this kind of idea that sometimes, sort of like the devil made me do it, kind of this dualistic sort of thing. Sometimes I just respond to the bad spirit, and I get led away, and then the good spirit comes in and takes over, and I remember. And he said, no. He said, it's not like that. He said, there is one spirit. Now, he called it Gitchi Mando, but there's a great spirit, is what he said. It's the great spirit. He said, there is one spirit, and we are all part of it. We are all connected. White man, red man, Odawa, Chippewa. He said, the bad spirit is when we forget. It's not something else. It's us. The good spirit is when we remember. It's not something else. It's us. Great spirit is always here. I started thinking about that. It just came. I had not thought about that experience because it was 10 years ago until I started thinking this week about this whole idea of what is the spirit. We live in a reality where most of our worldviews sort of see things dualistically. And it's sometimes comfortable for us because it's easy for us to sort of separate ourselves from the bad, from the bad choices we make, or sometimes the destructive behavior, or sometimes the guilt. It's easy sometimes for us to separate ourselves from ourselves. And it's a Greek thinking. I mean, Paul speaks in those terms himself in the New Testament. It's a Western way of thinking. But it's not the way in which the Old Testament thought. For when the Old Testament was speaking of spirit, it was God's breath, ruah. Ruah Elohim, the breath of God. It was already there. And the Native American, what he was telling me was that that's the way it is. We are all connected. Now, of course, you realize that science is already talking about this. I mean, it's already been talking about this for some time. You take a breath, and your breath is interconnected with everything else around you, but everything else beyond here as well, which are also interdependent on everything around them. The trees, the earth, the industries we design. I mean, everything is interdependent. It's all connected. And yet something moves in and out, animating life. The good spirit, we simply remember to connect to it. And when the interesting thing about this is that, we grew up in a culture which has always been about rugged individualism, right? I'm going to make my way, I'm going to succeed, I'm going to accomplish this and that, and then we look back on all the things we've done. But in reality, I think the message of the gospel and the message of teachings from around the world are that it's not rugged individualism. It's passionate interdependency. That when we can become passionately interdependent, our world is going to be a whole lot better place. and we might actually begin to experience some of what ultimately is the kingdom of God in our midst. I wanted to share this with you. I literally was sort of looking through my notes late last night, and I just kind of decided I would get online and take a look at some Rumi, just because I thought maybe I need a poem. And, of course, Rumi, who was a 13th century Sufist mystic, one of the whirling dervishes, and grew up in the tradition of the Islamic tradition, but he moved sort of away from some of that into much more of a holistic, mystical path. And so he writes poetry that often speaks to this interconnectedness in a passionate way. And I thought this so speaks to the animation of the Spirit in our midst, to what it means to be animated, to be connected to that, to literally light fire. So this poem is called, Who Gets Up Early to Discover the Moment? Who gets up early to discover the moment the light begins? What was whispered to the rose to break it open last night? It was whispered to my heart. You've gotten drunk on so many kinds of wine. Taste this. It won't make you wild. It's fire. Give up if you don't understand by this time that your living is firewood. Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, there is a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and attend them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. It may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing. Invite them in. The sorrows are like rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover, but then they are taken off. And then the body beneath is the sweetness that can come after grief. You have not dared lose faith enough. So how can faith grow in you? Gamble everything for love if you're a true human being. In the New Testament, it's called pneuma. In the Old Testament, ruah. But it's in the midst of everything. It is what we are made of. We are connected. And so breathe. Why the presence all around us? Breathe. If that's all you do, take in a breath and feel just how powerful and purifying that is. And when you let it out, it is a gift. Surround yourself with those who can fan the flames. Every time that the Spirit has animated in these stories, it is because people realize the connection. If you realize the connection, if we recognize the connection, can you just lay back? I mean, really? Can you not just see every moment? Doesn't it just suddenly strike you that everything suddenly is new and every moment suddenly is new? And every injustice suddenly needs to be spoken out against, and every pain suddenly needs to be shared a little? And every person needs to be greeted, and every life moment needs to be thanked for? If we recognize the Spirit in our midst, aren't we overcome with the power of love? And what else can we do? I've got Spirit. How about you? Let's stand together.